News item from the Westover, Maine Weekly Enterprise, August 19, 1966. Rain of stones reported. It was reliably reported by several persons that a rain of stones fell from a clear blue sky on Carling Street in the town of Chamberlain on August 17. The stones fell principally on the home of Miss Margaret White, damaging the roof extensively and ruining two gutters and a downspout valued at approximately $25. Miss White, a widow, lives with her 3-year-old daughter, Carrie. This is how Carrie begins. Carrie was Stephen King's first published novel, first bestseller, and one of his most famous books, while at the same time one of the least read. It's probably one of the best examples we have of pop culture osmosis, as pretty much everyone knows what being the Carrie of the group means, when not confusing it with Sex and the City, which is a completely different genre and subject. And the black prom scene has been parodied everywhere, from The Simpsons to Tiny Toons Adventures, which means that it was possible for someone to know who Carrie White was and what she did, even before knowing who Stephen King is. And that also means that most people know the basic plot, but not everyone knows exact details of the story. And with the many adaptations that the story has had, but in an official way, with parodies and references in other shows and movies, the main details have become a bit of a broken telephone game, where yes, we get the gist of the original message, but a lot is lost in translation. And yet, despite the changes, the Flanderization of some of the characters, the simplification of the actual black prom, the fact is that those changes were made and they still work perfectly in context of how the original novel itself was written, in a way that everything, from the way the color of Carrie's prom dress changes from the book's red to all the films that were pink, to how Carrie's revenge itself is presented, are a perfect example of how we react to tragic news nowadays. I'm Annalisa Zarate, and today we're going to talk about Carrie as we start exploring the dark and wonderful world of Stephen King. But before I do that, a little bit of history. In 1979, a 16-year-old girl grabbed a rifle and started shooting into the schoolyard next door. She killed 2 people, wounded 9, and when she was arrested alive and asked why she had done it, she simply replied, "I don't like Mondays." Since then, there have tragically been other school shootings, each more and more deadly than the last. But they all leave us with the same question. Why? There are articles, movies, documentaries, and thousands of theories about each one. So in every one, a lot of people point to different causes. And yes, I know it's usually violent video games and horror movies. But even in the cases where the shooter survived, we never really know the whole story and reasons. We just know what the director, interviewer, writer, witnesses, or even the shooter themselves want us to know. An interviewer may portray the shooter as a poor victim of abuse and bullying, while a director can convince you in a documentary that the shooter was evil all along and just needed an excuse to pull the trigger. What all those stories have in common is that none of them have the full picture, but all of them agree on the outline. There was a tragedy, and that tragedy could have been stopped if people just had understood the previous ones, stopped, and watched the warning signs. And this is exactly the point of Carrie. Carrie is this big outline of tragedy, which other people use to tell their own versions of events. And they leave us with the feeling that we know what happened, when even when we read the original book, we don't. See, Carrie was published in 1974, and it's to date the only Stephen King book that has been written in epistolary fashion. We do get parts of the story narrated in third person, following the events as they happened, maybe. so to speak, because each one is in a different point of view from a different character, and each character have their own bias. But there's also a huge part of the book that consists of newspaper clippings, book quotes that come from scholarly texts written in universe about the Black Prom and what caused it, and books written by the survivors. Plus, we also get lengthy interviews by the White Commission, which was a government investigation that tried to figure out who was really to blame for what happened. The end result is not only a powerful story that has a very memorable scenes, but also this feeling of immersion that no other King novel has ever reached. Because despite the supernatural elements, we know that the aftermath can happen that way with practically every tragedy. We have seen it happen so many times that even King himself has compared Carrie to the famous Columbine shooters, who killed their classmates, allegedly due to constant and relentless bullying. By the way, that narrative is the main plot to Carrie. Ask most anyone about Carrie, and even if they haven't read the book, or seen the movies, or watched the musical, or seen one of the many parodies, they will tell you that it's about a telekinetic kid who is relentlessly bullied, and then their classmates break her, drop her insane by dropping pig blood on her during prom, and then she kills them all. Oh, Carrie also has an abusive mother who happens to be a religious fanatic, and she also tries to kill Carrie and ends up dead at Carrie's hands too. As an outline, that's all there. That's it, that's the story. But as the many adaptations and references prove, there's also a lot more to Carrie than just her bare bones. Let's talk first about the bare bones. Partially because it's the only way to explain why, even after reading the book, it's hard to say that we know exactly what happened, and partly because I really don't want to give you too many details, because you really should read the book yourself or watch the movies. And if you can, watch the musical too. Actually, watch everything that I mentioned here. It's a really great experience. But going back to my point, you really should read the books, especially if you are already familiar with the pop osmosis version. So the story, as it's presented in the book, goes like this. Carrie White is the very sheltered daughter of Margaret White, who is an extreme religious fanatic and whose religious views have made her physically and mentally abusive to Carrie. Because of this sheltered education, Carrie has been constantly bullied all her life, from elementary school to high school. Even little kids who cross her path call her Scary Carrie. And then she first gets her period while showering after PA class, and while Carrie believes that she is bleeding to death because Margaret has never told her what a period is, every single one of her classmates start mocking her and throwing tampons and sanitary napkins at her, until a teacher, Miss Desjardins, arrives and puts a stop to it. As a punishment, all the girls get detention under the threat that if they don't assist to it, they will get barred from the upcoming senior prom. Because that is the worst punishment you can give a girl in high school in 1976. All the girls accept the punishment, except for the ringleader, Chris Hargensen, who swears that she will get a revenge on Carrie and later on the school for making her lose her prom for just making a joke at a freak. Another girl, Sue Snell, feels terrible for what happened and decides to ask her boyfriend, Tommy Ross, to ask Carrie to the prom, while she herself stays at home as a self-inflicted extra punishment. At the prom, Carrie has a good time at first, and she and Tommy are crowned king and queen, which is when Chris, helped by her boyfriend, Billy Nolan, takes her revenge by dumping a bucket of pig's blood over Carrie's head, humiliating her in front of the whole school and ruining prom by accidentally killing Tommy with that same bucket. Unfortunately for everyone involved, Carrie is telekinetic, and after this last prank, breaks down and uses her powers to kill everyone at school. Later, destroys the town, goes home, kills her mother when Margaret tries to kill Carrie, and as she's leaving the scene of the crime, happens upon Chris and Billy, who are escaping, and kills them too, which is when her powers finally take her toll on her, and Carrie dies in Sue Snell's arms, who happened to be there. Told like that, which is more or less how all the movies and the musical portray the events, by the way, only changing the order of Chris, Billy, and Margaret's deaths, the conclusion is quite easy. Bullying is bad, and Carrie is a victim of both her mother and the society that completely failed her. Carrie is innocent. She only went insane because the prank triggered her previous trauma. And while some of the people who died at school may have been innocent, they all laughed at her, and they all seemed to turn a blind eye to what Carrie suffered before. You really can't blame the girl for snapping and, well, going Carrie over the school. The problem is that that's not quite what happened. Yes, the prank was pretty much as I just told you. However, the movies, the pop osmosis version, even the musical, they don't give us the details that we get both in a section through Carrie's eyes, her point of view, which would be the closest to the truth, and some extra details that were part of an article, We Survived the Black Prom, by Norma Watson for the Reader's Digest, and a little extra from Sue, who caught bits and pieces of the story because she wasn't there. She is there in the movies, she is a direct witness to the destruction in the movies, but in the book she wasn't there. In the book she only gets this story told by other survivors. For example, according to Norma, no one laughed at Carrie. They watched in horror as the blood covered her, and then the bucket hit Toby and sounded like a big clang, like a cartoon, and that's when people started laughing. Unfortunately, that was the point where Carrie opened her eyes, and the stark contrast of her white eyes through all that red of the blood and the situation, which was so horrible, it made people laugh because at that point it was either laugh or cry. And as Norma says in her article, after all those years of bullying, of pranks, of jokes, no one would cry for Carrie. But still, the laughter wasn't at Carrie. The laughter was a bad reaction. The movie, the first movie made in 1976, directed by Brian De Palma, manages to take this very weirdly, but very well, because we see people laugh through a filter. So we don't really know if they are really laughing or if Carrie's imagining it. The rest of the movies, the 202 TV movie and the latest remake, make very clear that people start laughing, but not why they are laughing. Ironically, the 1976 movie made Norma one of Chris' sidekicks on this prom prank, which was later taken on by the rest of the adaptations, and thus one of the very few people we can be sure laughed at Carrie's misfortune, which made her one of the first killed, and that is a very good example of how much a character can change from one version to the next. In any case, Carrie never understands or believes that people aren't laughing at her. She had already come to the prom half convinced that it was all a joke, that people were going to laugh at her, that she was not going to be welcomed. So the prank at the end is just a confirmation of the bias. So she's convinced everyone was into the joke, that all of the previous niceness was just a farce. So she does what everybody would do in her situation. She runs. This is something that no movie, parody, or reference ever mentions. That Carrie leaves the stage like a normal girl, running, trips, although she believes someone tripped her, to the point that she's even waiting for them to kick her in the ass, which doesn't happen. She manages to run away, to leave the gym behind, to go to the schoolyard, and that's when things get great. Because Everybody stays in the gym, in the dance, still shocked at what happened. Some even go to help Tommy, who is now unconscious or maybe dead on stage, and Carrie stops. Here is where I say something very important. I understand many of these changes were made because it was faster and less redundant for the movie to start the destruction right away. And that is why we also see Sue and Chris being present. Sue trying to stop what happened, to stop the prank, and Chris, of course, laughing in glee at what happened. Neither of them are there in the book. Sue had resigned herself to stay at home. She was waiting for Tommy to tell her if Carrie had had a good time the next day. And Chris and Billy ran away like bats out of hell after pulling the cord that drew the blood because they didn't want to be seen. Billy is very clear to Chris that their little prank is not just a prank, it's assault. And that can land them on jail if they are caught. So they get into Billy's car, they run to the local bar, and they spend most of the destruction either having sex or asleep. And it's not until hours later, almost the next day, when they realize how badly everything went. Carrie stops, as I said, and that's when she gets this choice. She could go back to her house, humiliated, cry, admit to her mother that she had been wrong, that she shouldn't have gone to the prom, that yes, everybody else is a sinner, and then going back to school the next day, knowing that everybody was going to laugh at her forever. And then she remembers her powers. And the other choice, the path she takes, is going back to the gym and then trap everybody there, flood the place with the sprinklers, and use both the electric system and the many paper decorations around to set fire to everything, after personally electrocuting a couple of her tormentors, all the while smiling and feeling better as she finally teaches them not to mess with Carrie White. Which of course muddles the previously mentioned image of Carrie as a victim, because the fact that she went back proves that she was planning to kill everyone, rather than just to snap into madness right at the stage of the prank as the movies portray. Carrie is still a victim of bullying pushed too far, of course. She wouldn't have hurt anyone if the prank hadn't happened. But that simple moment, that proved that she had a moment of clarity where she could just left and keep her head down. It makes the destruction that follows a bit harder to justify, especially because once she is sure that everybody in the gym is dying, horribly being burned alive, she went ahead and destroys as much as she can of the town, including at least all the hydrants around schools so the firemen couldn't destroy, quote, her beautiful fires, also a gas station and a church. I'm really sorry that the church scene is always cut from every single adaptation, and well, you can see it's the one that I'm drawing here, because she prays for forgiveness and finds no answer, and that's one of the saddest scenes, because that's when you see Carrie finally and completely break. But since she continues by killing pretty much everyone who crosses her path, it's really hard not to agree with the survivors who hadn't even met Carrie for that night, that maybe she was really a monster, despite how much Sue, in her later My Name is Sue Snell book, tries to clean Carrie's reputation. So, after praying, Carrie goes back to her house. And again, this changes a lot from the movies to the book, because in the movies, Carrie is really repentant. Carrie is washing the blood of her body and asking her mother to comfort her. And that's when Margaret decides, hey, look, I have a knife here and I'm going to use it to kill you. However, Carrie goes to her house with the express intention of killing Margaret. We don't really know how people found out about what happened. In fact, the book says that there is no real way to know how it happened, because everyone involved in those last scenes are dead. And while we can follow Carrie's path of thought and we can follow Margaret's path of thought, we can't also be sure if they are telling us the truth. Because by this point, we are already doubting the way in which certain events are told. So we don't really know how to react to some. By this point, we know Carrie is not a heroine. Carrie is not completely a victim. She is what we would call a villain protagonist. And thus, thanks to this combination of point of views, of different ways to tell the story. We can place every single adaptation of the book as in an in-universe production, as if they were part of the universe of that book, trying to explain the event, which may not be quite like what really happened. Sue herself says in her book, and I quote, "They finally even made a movie about it. I saw it last April. When I came out, I was sick. But we don't know why it made her sick. Was that movie she saw like the Brian De Palma one, where Carrie was pictured more like an innocent angel and everybody around her hated her? Or more like the 202 TV movie, where one could believe that Carrie was enjoying her massacre? Or maybe it was a completely different take of the story, where they portrayed Sue as a convenient liar who participated in the prank that would destroy Chamberlain. We don't know. We know from the other books quoted inside Carrie that the last possibility is exactly what everybody thought after the White Commission's report, that Sue, Chris, Tommy, and Bill were all together in the planning of the prank, as they wished to humiliate Carrie for no reason. And since 3 of the 4 are dead by the time the investigation was done, it was very easy to blame her. Well, them, but she was the only one alive to be blamed. Sue becomes complicated because she has point of view chapters. And we know that she never meant any ill to Carrie, which is why Carrie spares her at the end, after reviewing her memories and seeing that yes, there was animosity, but there was no malice. But there is no clear answer as to why she participated in the original shower pelting, more than peer pressure, or why she actually decided to ask Tommy to ask Carrie for the prom. In the book, we know that her biggest fear is to become an outsider, to be painted with the exact same target as Carrie has. But she also is terrified of fitting in. She fears becoming this perfect housewife that always does what everyone else does, that keeps up the status quo and also fights to keep all those others, the difference, away from her nice little town and her nice little reality. Because of that, it's possible to say that even when she loved Tommy, she was also throwing him at Carrie because she was kind of hoping that he would fall in love with Carrie, because she didn't want to end up marrying him and fulfill everybody's expectation of her life. The book is ambiguous about this. The 1976 version makes Sue become this fairy godmother to Carrie without Carrie knowing it. And the 202 version goes as far as to even have certain suffix subtext between the two, aided by the fact that in that version, Carrie doesn't try to kill Sue, and instead Sue saves her life, and they end up running away together for a TV series that was never made. Sue gets the advantage of always look like a hero with some gray shades in the adaptations. But every single one turned Chris into the most blunt, one-dimensional bully possible. Yes, in the book she is bad. I mean, she made a girl lose toes by sticking a firecracker on her shoes just because she had a hair lip. Her whole relationship with Billy is violent, and while Billy hits her, Chris abuses him mentally too. They are a very toxic couple. And yes, while the 1976 movie makes her a little bit more passive and even sort of implies that it was Billy's idea to drop the blood and that she never actually meant lasting harm to Carrie. In all versions, she wants to see Carrie covered with the blood, while Billy goes to a point in which he doesn't really care who gets covered as long as someone gets humiliated. And then later on, she demands that Billy runs over Carrie with his car, or tries to run over Carrie herself. She is the bully, the evil alpha bitch who will never show a shred of remorse of her actions. But she does. Again, every character has a different side in the book. It's a little tiny line that can't be actually replicated in the movies because it's in her mind seconds before she dies. Carrie, Jesus, not to kill her, Carrie, didn't mean to kill her, Carrie! And while that's not quite regret, and one can say that it's just that, well, she didn't want to kill Carrie, just ruin her life and make her kill herself, it's still enough to wonder why Chris was such a bully. We don't have a motive at all why she targets Carrie. At some point, Chris says that Carrie had been around town saying that everybody was going to hell except for her and her mama, but that never actually happens in the book. We never see Carrie do that. And of course, it doesn't happen in the movies. We know that Carrie tries to hide her deep religious feelings because she knows that they make her different. The musical gives us a couple of hints, and I'm counting the musical as part of the canon because while it was not written by Stephen King, it was written by the man who wrote the screenplay for the 1976 movie. So he knew the characters pretty well. And the line in her Billion song, which is really catchy, and I wish I could show it to you, but YouTube. The line says, "My daddy taught me you get nowhere being nice. So now I'm sharing his advice. The word according to Chris is better to strike than get struck. Better to screw than get screwed." Of course, the musical is also the one adaptation that manages to do what no other version does. Make us question the intentions of Margaret White. There is a reason why Margaret White is usually in most terrifying billions of horror lists. She doesn't have powers or a huge body count, but she is quite terrifying in her own way. We see her hit her daughter for menstruating, for wanting to be normal, for looking at the neighbor's daughter while she was sunbathing when Carrie was 3 years old. It's a wonder that A, child services haven't taken Carrie away, and B, that Margaret hasn't killed Carrie before the events of the book. Actually, the last one is not for lack of trying. Margaret hates the fact that she wasn't strong enough to kill Carrie when Carrie was born, and later when Ralph stopped her. Which, by the way, is quite a feat, considering that Ralph had been dead for 7 months or so by the time Carrie was born. This is actually a line that creates a lot of controversy among some readers because some consider it's just a mistake from a newbie writer and a careless editor. Others claim that it could be a ghost, which, of course, yeah, why not? Telekinetic Kid, Ghost Father, next sitcom in NBC. But for me, it's more Margaret wanting to blame her weakness, well, her perceived weakness, her perceived sin, into something else. To try to explain to God why she didn't kill Carrie because the little girl was a witch, for example. In the movies, she even calls her little her love, her treasure, before trying to stab her with a knife. Again, Margaret is really insane. But the thing is that the book gives those little hints, as I mentioned, that sometimes Margaret goes that she was weak. And we know that she fed and dressed and raised Carrie for 16 years. That sort of twisted love, which is where I think the musical gives her a clearer motive when she begs God in a song to spare her daughter. We still are completely terrified by Margaret, don't worry, and we know that Margaret planned to kill Carrie even before the Black Prom. It's not, oh, my daughter killed all these people, she deserves to die. It's, oh, my daughter wore a dress that showed the upper part of her breasts, she must die. Crazy fundamentalist religious person. So she is actually as much to blame for the incident as Chris and Billy are for the way she treats Carrie. I have to mention that if there is a character that has been flanderized, it's Margaret, because Pipers Laurie, the actress who interpreted her in 1976, made her so absolutely crazy that it was impossible to believe that she ever cared for her daughter. It is also notable to say that none of the other Margarets are as memorable because they never are as abusive as Laurie's Margaret. Laurie's Margaret gave Mommy Dearest a run for her money, while, for example, as I said, the musical Margarets have those moments of, hey, maybe she actually loves her daughter her own way. And Julianne Moore's Margaret for the 2013 movie gives her a sort of, maybe she has an actual mental problem that makes it harder for her to connect to Carrie. Still crazy, still evil, but not as evil. And finally we have Carrie. Poor abused Carrie. I already point out that we don't really know if she completely snapped or if she did her massacre fully aware of the wrongness of it all, as the book at moments imply, without actually reaching into victim blaming. Sue defends her, calls her an innocent girl who only wanted to be left alone, but Sue was not there for the actual destruction. And even if Carrie wasn't fully sane when she killed her classmates, even if that was a snap decision caused by hormones and fear and pain, the destruction of the rest of the town is a little harder to justify. And so is the death of her mother, because in the book, the death of her mother is not self-defense. As I mentioned, there is this point where she goes to church. Carrie goes, kneels and prays for forgiveness, for a sign, for anything, and she gets nothing. Quoting from the book, no one was there, or if there was, it was cowering from her. God has turned his face away. And why not? This horror was as much his doing as it was hers. And so she left the church, left it to go home and find her mama and make the destruction complete. One could say that this paragraph proves that Carrie was sane and aware of her actions when she went to kill Margaret, even as the movies make her actions completely self-defense. But as anyone who has gone through a crisis of faith can tell, it could also be the last straw. Carrie finding out that everyone, even her mama, had lied to her, that God is not with her, that God may not even exist, and so being broken and wanting in her grief and madness to end it all. If by this point you think the point of the book was that Carrie wasn't a victim but a revenge seeker who ended up killing more people than those who deserved it, I strongly recommend you to read the book again. Yes, it's a horror book. Yes, Carrie is a villain protagonist, but precisely because I wanted to avoid spoilers, and this was already a little bit too long for a first YouTube video, I wanted to show you that there was a different reading that just bullied girl gone insane, and a lot more nuisance than crazy outsider gone insane, just like in real life. After all, in every story there are many narrators, and every one of them has a bit of a bias. With each retelling, we lose a little bit of the truth. As Sue says, and I quote the book, whenever anything important happens in America, they have to gold-plate it like baby shoes. That way you can forget it, and forgetting Carrie White might be a bigger mistake than anyone realizes. Change Carrie name for any shooter in the past 20 years, and the quote still works, don't you think? And now I want to thank you for listening, for watching, and also to thank personally to my dear Patreons, Kaiser Carranza, Mitch Hyman, and Elaine Ho, as well as my first ever Patreon supporter, Tanya Pineda. I also want to remind you that if you want to support these kind of videos and my other projects, you can do so at patreon.com/Adalisa. Written link on description, as I know my name can be a pain to spell. And with just $1 a month, you will always be thanked in my videos. If you can support me that way, I also like likes, subscriptions to the channel, comments so the algorithm catches engagement, and of course you sharing the links. I will also welcome all your questions, comments and suggestions in the comments below. So thank you so much for being here, and I will see you next time when I hit the next Stephen King book, Salem's Lot.